Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild adventure, The Wizard of Zoe, designed by JVC Parry for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to Platinum patrons Andrew, Brian, Richard, and Joe. Gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy and Yuma, Marcos, David, Vicente, Gilberto, and Sean, aka Cert2B. Thank you all very much for your support. I've mentioned previously in D&D context that I really like it when we use stories that everyone is aware of. We call these like shared cultural touchstones. So usually it's movies. Occasionally it can be like, fables, things like Romeo and Juliet, like things that everybody is kind of aware of. And I like the concept of using these and then applying them to, for the Forgotten Realms or the use of D&D, because immediately everyone at the table kind of knows the general structure, knows the characters, knows the themes, maybe knows the enemy types, and I think that's actually an advantage, and it's a fun shorthand for both DMs and players to immediately jump on board and be like, okay, I know what's going on with this because I recognize it, and it's a pretty obvious story. And it's used a lot of times, obviously, with I reviewed a collection of fairy tales that did that very well too, with some of the well-known fairy tales, Red Riding Hood, Cinderella, and those kind of things. This is very obviously The Wizard of Oz. However, it's not The Wizard of Oz. It actually just pulls together a lot of characters and monsters from The Wizard of Oz, and actually using those characters and monsters pretty much builds its own original story. So it's not just a straight-up retelling. You're not going down the yellow brick road. You're not visiting the wizard. There's no wicked witch at all. It actually just takes certain elements from The Wizard of Oz and then creates a neat story that fits particularly well within Tomb of Annihilation. The Wizard of Zoe is a Tier 2 mini-adventure design, and Tier 2 is levels 5 through 10. And it's going to take about 5 to 10 hours. That's always hard to judge just reviewing it and reading it, but it fits really, really well within Tomb of Annihilation. It uses a lot of the monsters that are featured quite a bit in Tomb of Annihilation, such as flying monkeys and were-tigers. The actual titular wizard is a hilarious, basically an awakened Zorbo. So it's the gag about the Wizard of Zoe. As Zorbo basically happened upon this wizard who had died and had this circlet of intellect, so the Zorbo could wear it and become essentially awakened, as well as get his spellbook and magic wand. So suddenly you've got this magically powered Zorbo, gets an army of were-tigers, and is assaulting this camp. And the camp is very much similar to Camp Vengeance or Camp Righteous. It is set up as, in fact, it's almost a little too on the nose, copied from Camp Vengeance in terms of it's an outpost created by the Order of the Gauntlet, and it's not doing so well, which is basically what the Camp Vengeance is. However, I'm not going to knock that against this adventure because I think it actually is better than Camp Vengeance. Let's go ahead and jump into The Wizard of Zoe, which I do really enjoy this adventure. I was expecting literally just a blatant retelling of The Wizard of Oz, and it's actually not that. It is a just good mini adventure that's set, I say within Tomb of Annihilation. You could obviously put it anywhere, but it just fits really, really well into Tomb of Annihilation, given the jungle theme and the Order of the Gauntlet, the way it uses the camps and all that. But I think it does use those elements very, very well. It is divided up into 3 parts, with part 1 as the players get to Camp Resistance. Again, a play on the fact that we had Camp Righteous and Camp Vengeance. There are multiple plot hooks provided to get your players there, either from Camp Vengeance or from Port Nyanzaru, or they could just happen upon Camp Resistance somewhere in the jungle. Again, very much meant for Tomb of Annihilation. You do get this one embedded map here. The actual dungeon map later on we're given separate DM and player maps for, which is good. This one is just this map here. I would have liked to see that given the same kind of treatment. As they actually show up here, the zombie T-Rex attacks, which, man, I just had a zombie T-Rex attack Camp Vengeance, so and I hadn't read this before I reviewed it, so I unwittingly ripped off this adventure, although I did it with a big undead army. This one is just the zombie T-Rex, but that's a really cool opening that I unfortunately wouldn't use in my campaign since I basically already did something similar. The players literally get to the gates, the zombie T-Rex comes barreling out of the jungle. They can either turn and fight it or basically bang on the door really quick and try to get inside and help fend it off. But that's a pretty fun encounter and a good way of using a high-powered creature because there's a bunch of ballistas set up that are going to help take it down. I do think what is this one? Camp Resistance is a little more fun than Camp Vengeance. Especially the cast of characters are really, really enjoyable. And here, the author really went above and beyond. You can see multiple paragraphs, some really, really great character art from Danny Pavlov, which just absolutely fantastic. I mean, they look like it's the art from Tomb of Annihilation. Just incredible. And they're given a lot of detail, and there's not even any specific quests involved in these characters. It's just really, because I'm given so much information and great portraits, it makes me want to use these characters. Of course, it is run by Lieutenant Dorothy Waters, who's trying to keep things together. She's kind of in the early stages of alcoholism because things are going very badly for her. I love this grumpy halfling who's really just kind of a good guy, just kind of a classic TV doctor kind of a role. Amalia is a badass gladiator. You've got Quento and their friend Pole Kobe, a awakened giant snapping turtle. Another great portrait there. Just really, I don't know, just really fun characters. There's not a whole lot of interaction necessary here, but there can be, and there's certainly probably more here than there would be in Camp Vengeance. There are a few optional encounters in Part 2, as well as one mandatory encounter, that just kind of add just a little bit more things to do, and I kind of skipped by the actual things inside the camp itself, which has, again, the same as Camp Vengeance. There's field hospital tents, there's a command tent. There is this one really neat giant stone formation pedestal in the middle of the camp called Ubtau's Ikowa, or Yikowa, a giant spear thrust into the ground where they can make a, let's see, it's a skill check? No, it's a donation. If you donate 10 gold or more, then touch the pillar, you gain true sight out for a minute, which that doesn't really do much for you, I don't think. Or you get punished as if for the maze spell if you don't donate. So it's just kind of a neat little thing in the middle. There's also a friendly ankylosaurus somewhere in here called Bumpy that the players could befriend. Always put in befriendable dinosaurs in your Tomb of Annihilation adventures. I can't recommend that enough. So Part 2 has two pretty easy to run encounters. A Spinosaurus attacks Quento and Polakobe from the river, which is a neat moment, and it has got some options for adjusting the difficulty. It doesn't have like a straight up reduce the hit points or add another thing. It's just kind of in the story. You can just have terrafolk swoop in or have a swarm of quippers in the river. The other thing they can do is go down to the nearby mine and just have a single encounter with a bunch of undead. Again, just if you want to add some more, your players are just chatting it up a lot and you want to add some more combat in there, that's nice to have. The main encounter, however, is a tribute where this giant floating green mask, that classic scene from Wizard of Oz, just comes stomping out of the jungle with this pride of were-tigers. Really cool art on this were-tiger. Demanding tribute of gold and supplies. And it's really draining the camp's funds and ability to sustain itself. They're just basically being extorted. And the players can choose to fight off this band, which, were-tigers are pretty strong, especially a bunch of them. Depending on where the players are, from 5 to 10. They were fighting... I haven't really had a were-tiger fight my players in Tomb of Annihilation. They are currently level 4. They just got to level 4, and I would be very, very worried about facing, a were-tiger, if not more. So it's a pretty strong combat encounter. The players are not meant to fight it, however. They don't need to. Instead, they just need to follow them back to get to the dungeon in Part 3. Obviously, they get the mission from Dorothy. It's like, hey, can you help us out here? Go take these on. So it's not that complex to run. And then Part 3 is the dungeon. It's the Tomb of Impersonation, which is the Zorbo named Zoe has also found in the Wizard's Journal, included some notes on the Tomb of Annihilation. He liked that, so helped kind of fit out this lair to be this bit of a death trap. And we've got a very thematically appropriate death trap full of obvious references to the Wizard of Oz. So you've got a room full of helmed horrors who seek out and try to rip out your heart and take it for themselves. There's a really, really fun puzzle up here in Z11 that involves two lion statues, one of which is proud, the other one is sniveling and cowardly. And the solution, of course, is you have to give the sniveling lion courage. And the note suggests, you could cast the bless spell or the heroism spell or do stone shape to make it, more standing up or something. A way to let your players think outside the box to try to solve that puzzle, which I really appreciate. Of course, there's a ton of flying monkeys in one room, which there's a funny bit where the flying monkeys all hold a different key, and 3 of the keys are colored red, green, and blue, and then the actual doors leading from Z5, Z6, and Z7 here are red, blue, and green. So literally they have to capture certain monkeys as the monkeys just fly around and throw like pebbles at them. I'm glad it said pebbles and not feces. I was a little worried they would change that. Although flying monkeys have a challenge rating of 0, and these have an AC of 13 and an actual better attack, a +3 to hit that can do an average of 4 damage, and they don't provoke an attack for opportunity when it flies out of an enemy's reach. That makes me feel like the flying monkeys should have maybe been given at least some kind of, because at 0/0 they give 0 XP for taking out, whereas I feel like here they were actually bumped up to be a little bit more of a threat. Z1 has a clay golem in the middle with a pit that slaps down into slide from stairs to straight slide. Z8 here is the death gauntlet of the yellow brick road, which has been applied into literally just a death trap. I do wish there was a bit more. This is considered basically the DM map here. I wish there was a bit more information because it's a very complex map that takes up, you can see here, Z8, Eastern Corridor, an entire page to explain how this trap works. And it literally rolls on initiative 20 as the players move through this trap, and different things happen. It's got swinging sides happening in the first and last 25 feet. The middle 20 feet has poison darts that shoot out, and then throughout the whole thing, it sprays you with molten gold. Now, none of these are particularly damaging, but the idea is they have to keep going. Even if they're dashing, it's 70 feet long, so you're still having to take quite a bit of damage trying to move through this thing. So kind of interesting, although there are ways to get around it, which there are plenty. I mean, half of it is countermeasures, which is how to avoid the pressure plate, or how to smash the sides, or different skill checks there. And I really appreciate that, because that's one thing that you run into all the time when you're running these big death traps is, and you want your players to think outside the box. You want them to think of clever ways of just avoiding the trap. Obviously, as a DM, you want your players to feel the heat and the punishment from these kind of traps, but you want to reward out of the box thinking. So like shoving, cloth inside the holes of the poison darts or something. And that's something that I don't want to have to think about what the DC check on any of that is on the fly. Obviously, you can use a 15 or something, but I do really appreciate it when the author actually states like, okay, here are possible things the players can do, investigation checks, they can attack the actual sides, they can roll thieves' tools, and just give me all the skill checks there. That's really, really helpful, and I appreciate that. There's also a way to disable the molten gold spray. I believe there's a forge out in front the players can hit up and turn off to make this a little bit easier. In fact, there's also like the leader of the albino dwarf warriors is out front as well, and they can capture him, and it says he knows the entire layout of Zoe's lair, including which creatures are in which rooms, and how to open the secret doors. There's no way I'm going to put that character out there. I'm not going to give my players that much information. Maybe halfway through the dungeon you give them that information, but not out in front. You don't give them the NPC that knows like every single secret. Then what's the point of having secrets? Not too great there. But otherwise, I really like the design here. There's just a lot of neat stuff going on. There's doors in and out. There's 2 actual entrances to the thing. This tree in the middle with were-tigers just lounging about. There's, of course, a horn in the middle that... so there's an alarm system, but there's nobody near it at the moment. But if the players attack, then somebody will try to break off, especially like a were-tiger, will try to break off and sound that alarm, which will then obviously announce their presence to the rest of the dungeon. So that's always a good thing to go after. Zoe is here in Z12. He's got a Scarecrow, who's, of course, an insane cackling Scarecrow. He's got no brains. He himself... So the dungeon is full of these iron branches, which literally remind me of like a monkey or ape's habitat at a zoo, where it's just got all those, playground-style equipment that they can climb along. And it mentions the fact that a lot of these rooms are connected enough for him to be able to climb through and essentially just move through the dungeon unimpeded, and then he's got plenty of spells to kind of save himself, so he's got invisibility and all these things to get out of situations. So the idea is you're supposed to harass the players with Zoe, I think, the whole time, which I like. I like it when a boss doesn't just sit back in their final room and wait for the players to come to them. I like one that's more active, and it even mentions the fact that this dungeon is meant to be the lair is a living community. Outside of combat, inhabitants move between chambers, feed, wash, rest, and engage in all the strange realities of their day-to-day lives. And there's a lair roster here, which is also really helpful if like where creatures are and what are they doing and what do they do if the horn is the alarm is sounded. Some of them don't leave their rooms, and others do leave and patrol. which is really good information to have as a DM. The only thing is, I just wish this map itself had more information on there. Specifically, where are these branches? Just by glancing at this map, tell me where these branches are. It does say it in the text. And then, like, especially this hallway of Death Trap, tell me exactly, like, okay, where are the sides? Where are the, where's the section with the darts and all that? Just so I don't have to sit there and literally count the squares and figure it out. That's just helpful to have just at a glance, I feel like. And that's pretty much the whole adventure. You're looking at about 22 pages, not including the appendix, which is you got your various monster stat blocks in there. Oh yeah, Toto. You gotta have Toto. Surprise! Toto's a fucking chimera. Which is crazy. And one of the things it mentions, if your players, in the adjusted difficulty section, if your players are having a hard time, don't let Zoe open that door and unleash his chimera on them. Otherwise, you can let him do that. And that's part of the way, if your players are 5th level or 10th level, that's a big difference in terms of power. So there are ways to mitigate that or make things more powerful. And certainly unleashing a chimera on them when they're not prepared is one of them. I don't know why Toto is a chimera, but that's pretty hilarious that it's some like big giant monster the players have to deal with. It's got like a little, I think a leg bone over the door that says Toto on it, so the players can obviously get the reference. There's not a whole lot of an epilogue here. Obviously, they just kind of save the day for the camp, and that becomes another like base of operations. I guess that's really just one of my only complaints, and something I'm not even going to put as a con, because I do think it's actually more interesting than Camp Vengeance, but it also feels like just a bit of a retread of Camp Vengeance. I would have liked just a little more of a unique outpost rather than just, oh, it's another Order of the Gauntlet camp that was established around the same time Camp Righteous was, but wasn't destroyed like Camp Righteous was. Instead, they were able to hang on, but they're still being extorted and they're still in trouble. So especially if you want to run Camp Vengeance and Camp Righteous, running yet another Order of the Gauntlet camp within Tomb of Annihilation feels a little bit weird, and it's too bad because I do like the characters that are involved there quite a bit. I think that's fun. But if I were, so I'm running Tomb of Annihilation right now, which is kind of a unique aspect of reviewing an adventure that's designed to be set in Tomb of Annihilation, and I would probably not want to run at least Part 1 and 2 as written, because I've already just done a lot with those two camps in my campaign. I think if you haven't run Camp Vengeance yet, and you don't have a good idea of what to do with Camp Vengeance, because what's written in the official text isn't great, then this could actually be a pretty solid replacement for Camp Vengeance. Just use Camp Resistance, use those characters, and use this whole Wizard of Zoe adventure, and I think that would actually make it more interesting, especially if your players are more into traditional dungeon crawls, which Tomb of Annihilation doesn't have a whole lot of compared to other Dungeons & Dragons adventures. The way I run my campaign, I treat the jungle itself as kind of one big dungeon crawl, but even still, that's kind of just a facsimile of an actual dungeon, where I think this one provides an actual fun dungeon crawl. But if you have run those camps already, then I don't know if you would want to run a third one. Instead, I would probably use, I don't know, maybe just a small like campsite or something. Maybe not have the big fortification and not have so much going on, and just include Dorothy as somebody who needs help with some band of adventurers or something. Or alternatively, you just get rid of the whole camp, which is a bummer because there's good content there, and just run Part 3, which you absolutely could. You could literally just take Part 3, the dungeon, out of this adventure and run it as a dungeon. The players just stumble upon it, and maybe like halfway through they understand, oh, it's one giant Wizard of Oz reference, which would be kind of fun and would totally work. So yeah, I really like this adventure. I like the way it doesn't at all try to retell the Wizard of Oz. There's no, it's not like a hero's journey at all. There's no Wicked Witch, none of that stuff. There's a few fun references, obviously obvious references with some of the enemy types. You can find the ruby slippers as a big reward item from the wizard. Just treating the Wizard of Zoe, using that concept as the giant green face, and it's somebody behind, the man behind the curtain, but it's actually an awakened Zorbo behind the curtain, is fucking hilarious, and I think is a great twist on the story. And then using like were-tigers and albino dwarf warriors as fodder and all that just feels very, very thematically appropriate to Tomb of Annihilation, which is really, really cool, particularly cool if you're running Tomb of Annihilation and looking for just another fun mini adventure to run. Let's do my pros and cons for the Wizard of Zoe. Pro, it fits perfectly within Tomb of Annihilation while making obvious but fun references to the Wizard of Oz. Pretty much just what I said. That doesn't mean you necessarily, have to use it in Tomb of Annihilation. I think it's perfectly suited for any domain that has those kind of creatures, jungle, obviously, but it seems to work really well into Annihilation. If you're running Tomb, I think all of these creatures and concepts will work particularly well. And I really like the way it uses Wizard of Oz without just retelling that story. It just uses those concepts very well. Pros, transforming the wizard into Awakened Zorbo is both clever and hilarious. I thought that was just amazing. I didn't see that coming. That's not something I would have expected, to turn the Wizard of Oz concept of the man behind the curtain and this big green floating face. Maybe the players want to, and there's a good bit I didn't mention. A lot of the camp is divided on what this fucking thing means because, the players don't figure out it's a Zorbo behind the curtain at all. It's like a DC 20 perception check to try to see the Zorbo back, amongst the tree line. Otherwise, they think it's just this giant head speaking at them, and a lot of the Chultans think it's like the god of Ubtao speaking to them. And so it's a big, mysterious, what the hell is this going on, which is also great. That leads to a really fun twist once the players find out. Amazingly detailed cast of characters with great portraits. I really do love the cast here. I think it's fun, diverse group. It's a shame that it uses it within another Order of the Gauntlet camp setting, because that makes it a little less interesting for me to run personally, as someone who did run a lot of Camp Righteous and Camp Vengeance. I don't know if I would also want to run Camp Resistance, but I would try to find some way to include those characters if I wanted to run it, because they are fun characters, even though they don't actually have anything to do with Part 3. That's just kind of a fun way to use, one of those pillars of D&D, which is the role-playing pillar. Final pro, separate DM and player maps for the Tomb of Impersonation dungeon. Always, 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 I'm big on maps. And that's really, you do get the Camp Resistance map, the DM map, which is nice to have, but I'm not going to complain too much if I don't have maps for every single combat encounter. That's obviously great if I do, but if not, that's okay if I get that big, nice dungeon map, and I do think that was provided here very well, and it's a well-designed map. On the other hand, my one real only con is that the dungeon map, I would have liked to have more detail, at least on the DM layer, that specifically showed where are the traps located. Like how they do in the official WotC stuff, they just have a T symbol just marking physically where the traps are, specifically because there's a lot of complex inner workings in this dungeon that really could have needed something more than just indicating where the secret doors were. Specifically, those branching paths would have been nice to see, actual lines on the map showing where the Wizard of Zo can travel to, as well as having specifically where some of those traps were located would have been really useful to have. Final verdict on the Wizard of Zo. Wizard of Zo has a nice blend of combat, role-playing, and exploration. Does a great job utilizing fun references while still providing an original and enjoyable D&D dungeon crawl. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. And you can follow our own Dungeons and Dragons adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.